Join the conversation.
Join the conversation.
You're with Kate Talk.
It is 9:37. Welcome back. Views and News Little 12 on this Friday morning. And it is time for Dr. Chris Smith, the naked scientist, lecturer at the University of Cambridge, and a big appointment right here on Views and News. He's here to answer your questions. Any questions that you may have in respect to the universe, your health, or just those questions, those niggly questions that keep you awake at night. You're welcome. Dr. Smith, you need to settle a dispute.
Ooh,
That's been
sounds
raging
ominous.
this morning.
Go on then.
Yeah, it's been raging. Should dogs sleep outside or inside the house?
Well, it depends if they're your own dog, presumably. I've got two dogs. I had one for a long time, and he was desperate to be a daddy. And then we found a very nice black Labrador just like him, and someone who really, really wanted a daddy dog. And so nature took its course, and we now have his daughter. And she's absolutely gorgeous, and she's now about 5 or 6 months old. So now I've got two of the things, and they're an absolute nightmare. They're great, but they fight all the time, well, in a nice way. It's sort of training, but they rip everything up, they eat everything, they're so greedy. It's definitely exaggerated, the greediness. So in some respects, I'd be quite delighted if they moved out of the house, give me a bit of respite. It's like teenagers. But it really depends on what the dog's grown up doing, doesn't it? Some dogs are definitely house dogs. They're definitely lap dogs. They are a real softie and a pet, and they wouldn't survive 5 minutes outside. Other dogs are much more resilient and better at taking care of themselves. And so it really depends on the animal, and it depends on the weather. And also some dogs are just too hot indoors. I know people who keep huskies that they use up in the frozen wilds of the north. And those dogs cannot tolerate being inside because they are so thick-coated they would overheat in a second, because dogs can't sweat. They can only sweat through their pores. They lose heat by laying on cold surfaces, which is why dogs love your kitchen floor on a hot day. And they also pant, which is how they evaporate water off their long tongue, and that helps to shed heat. But dogs have a heat problem, and so sometimes being outside is better for them because it's cooler. But if it's too hot inside, they won't like it. If it's too hot outside, they're not going to like it. So it really comes down to the breed of the dog as well.
Okay, hopefully that settles that debate. Lots of messages in. We'll play that a little later on. A voice note from Alan. Let's take a listen.
Hello all, Alan from Bishwick here. Can I please ask Dr. Chris to explain why it is that the universe needs to be cyclic and not steady state, but that humanity doesn't need to worry about that because there's such a long time before the universe recycles that there's plenty of time for humanity to go extinct when the sun swallows our planet. Thank you very much.
There's a few assumptions in there, isn't there? That the universe is cyclic and all that. But to be honest with you, we really don't know what the fate of the universe is. We know that it's changed over time. We've got pretty good evidence that the universe, being about 13.8 billion years old, started from a very small source, which was very, very hot, very, very energetic and very, very tiny, and quite quickly became extremely large. It blew up and inflated in fractions of a second. And then it slowed down its growth, and we've got various lines of evidence that support that. But then we can also see evidence that it's also growing again. And the older it gets, the faster it grows. So the bigger it gets, the faster it goes, the faster it grows, I suppose you could say. Now, we don't really understand what's driving all that. We don't have anything other than theories. We've got no solid, hard evidence other than the observation that this is happening. And because we don't understand the mechanism of the growth of the universe and those changes, we can't therefore make meaningful predictions other than speculations about what the ultimate fate of the universe is. If this growth is going to carry on forever, and it's going to carry on growing faster the older the universe gets, then it's going to blow up, and eventually it'll get so big that the stars will be so far from each other and the universe growing between those stars so fast that it will grow faster than the light can get to us, so the universe will be cold and dark and we won't see anything anywhere. On the other hand, other lines of evidence suggest that perhaps it will slow down again, and there's been recent observations that the thing that's driving the expansion of the universe, this notional entity that we dub dark energy. Again, this is something that's inferred from the observation, and we don't know what this is, if it even exists, but it does appear to account for what we see, which is the more universe you get, the more dark energy you get, therefore there's more force pushing the universe apart. Well, there's now a suggestion that this is not uniformly distributed across the universe. And in some places, the effect of the dark energy is more focused and more acute than others. And this non-homogeneity has also got physicists scratching their heads. What's that going to do to the shape of the universe? Other people suggest that perhaps the universe will reach some kind of steady state and that we'll get to a certain size and then it'll become how Isaac Newton saw the universe, which was this fixed thing everywhere, unchanging indefinitely. And then other lines of evidence suggest that perhaps it will blow up for a while, get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then begin to shrink again. And then who knows what the fate will be. So at the moment, we don't know exactly what it's doing anyway. We don't know what its fate will be, and we don't know why it's doing it. And because we don't know why it's doing it, it's really hard to say what the long-term prospects are. But we can design experiments to test these things, and that then helps to push back the frontier of knowledge a bit.
Let's stay out in the big universe. This one reads from Alice. Professor Brian Cox once said that we humans are essentially the universe's consciousness, as we are self-aware and part of the universe. What commentary would the doc give on that statement?
Well, I think we as humans tend to regard ourselves as a bit more special than we really are, because we are one tiny blip in a massive place. The universe is extraordinarily big, absolutely huge. Our star is one of probably 1 followed by 22 zeros stars in the universe, and around each of those stars there might be 5 to 10 planets. Some of them are going to be a bit like the Earth, so there are huge numbers of potential Earths out there. And therefore there are huge numbers of rolls of the dice that there have been similar processes that have endowed this planet with a biosphere, with biology that ultimately has culminated in complicated animals like us. There are very high odds that this could be happening many, many times over across the universe. So have those animals and those beings got consciousness? Well, probably. They're almost certainly going to evolve along similar biological lines. They're constrained by chemistry. We know that the palette with which the universe is painted is the periodic table of elements that you see on every chemistry classroom wall. And we can see distant stars have got exactly the same palette running inside them. The same physics applies, therefore the same chemistry is going to apply. The same rules of chemistry and physics are going to apply wherever in the universe you are. So it's likely that there are going to be some commonalities regardless of where you are in terms of how life works. And therefore it's very likely that animals, if they do evolve, complicated animals, are going to work in a similar sort of way. So I would say that we're part of the rich tapestry of the universe, but we're not that special in it. That's going to be my prediction. I think we're special to ourselves, but I suspect that in the grand scheme of things, there are other very special things out there as well, waiting for us one day to be able to meet them and for them to meet us. And it was interesting, wasn't it? I don't know if you actually spoke to them yourselves here on Cape Talk, but a couple of weeks ago we had the scientist from Cambridge, Madhu, who has been looking at distant worlds and looking for signatures in the atmospheres of those distant worlds of life. And there was one particular entity, 124 light years away, a body which has a very rich signature in its atmosphere of dimethyl sulfide, DMS. We know this is strongly produced by life processes on Earth, and it's dynamically produced. So it's produced and then consumed. So if you see it, it must be coming from an active source, and life is the most prolific source on Earth. We therefore believe it's a good signature for possible life processes on other planets. This has been recently suggested as being present in the atmosphere of this distant planet. So perhaps that is a rich water world full of all kinds of interesting life. Perhaps they're all conscious, these whatever they are over there as well.
Yeah, that announcement from a colleague of yours at Cambridge, was it not? We spoke
That's
to
right.
him, and there was a 97% accuracy, which is not enough for you scientists for some
Well,
reason.
the thing with all this is that how are they making those observations? They're using the James Webb Space Telescope. The James Webb, launched a few years ago, looks through the atmosphere of a particular entity with the starlight coming through the atmosphere. And because light is absorbed and reflected by different chemical elements, you can see how the light changes when the star shines directly to us compared to when the starlight comes through the atmosphere. And that difference between what's making up the light of the star tells you what chemicals must be in the atmosphere, because they are absorbing the light from the star. And different chemicals have different signatures that affect the light in this way, and you can therefore infer what must be in the atmosphere. So you've got to do this, but you're doing this with an object which is ridiculously far away, and we're seeing the light as though someone had taken a candle to the other side of the moon, and you're looking at it, and it's really, really dim signatures, and it could be caught out or misled in many, many ways. So you've got to do this many times, got to have lots of corroborating evidence, and try and do the same sorts of experiments, but from a range of different perspectives and in different ways, and see if they all align on what you think is what's going on there, and that gives you more confidence. So physicists like to have strong confidence, not just a one-off observation, and that's why he's being cautious.
KK wants to know if scientists have been able to establish where the Garden of Eden is.
No, because obviously the Garden of Eden is a biblical story and points to a sort of origin of humankind, but it's not actually pointing at a specific geography. But genetics and anthropology can point to where the Garden of Eden is, and we know absolutely for certain, following genetic lines of evidence, that must be the African continent somewhere, for a start. Now, the reason we know that is because as we've evolved a particular genetic code, and when we have children, we pass that genetic code on to our offspring. And when those children move to other geographies, they take their genetic code with them and pass it on to their offspring. But as that happens and we evolve because of evolution and mutation, because every time we pass on our genes, we pass on a handful of new versions of those genes. These are mutations, and when I pass on my genes to my children, I will have handed on 50 to 100 genetic changes or mutations to them. Now, over time, these change the genetic code to a significant extent that you can tell one population from another. In other words, the diversity must be dropping away, because if I take a person from a population and I put them on the other side of the world, all the people that they give rise to genetically are going to have a more limited genetic repertoire than the population that individual came from. Where is the population genetic repertoire richest? We see the greatest diversity, differences in genetic codes in the African continent. So we're pretty confident that anatomically modern humans have some kind of origin somewhere in the African continent. Then it comes down to archaeology and paleoanthropology, looking at where we can find evidence that points to where people most closely resembling us physically were living or in greatest abundance, because that might be, or it's a likely site where they might probably have come from in the first place. Now, there's a number of different sites where that could have happened, and it's impossible to say for sure exactly where the earliest anatomically modern humans were, but there's a very rich fossil record in Africa, and especially in South Africa. Some of the best of the fossil records are in South Africa. So if I had to be a betting man, if I had to be a really betting man, I'd say number one, Africa, that's a dead cert. Number two, Southern Africa, and or Kenya, somewhere that sort of area, and I'd say if you put your money on somewhere along Southern Africa somewhere, the conditions are really, really ideal for these sorts of people to have evolved. I'd say that I'd have a reasonable odds of winning, better than the lottery anyway.
Yeah, maybe I should just add, Dan, it's been recently endorsed by UNESCO as well. So the archaeological record at this particular moment in time geolocates that Eden that KK is looking for at the Southern African coastline.
There you go. So I was right to be a betting man then, wasn't I? There you go.
Absolutely. But that's a moving target, as the archaeological record is, of course, informed with time. But let's go to the voice note.
Good morning, Cape Talk family. My question is like this. Who decided that February should be the shortest month of the year, having 28 and sometimes 29 days? And what was the rationale? Thank you, Jabu Chilwani in Mkondo, Mpumalanga.
Yeah, why Feb?
This is, I think, probably a historical thing. I don't know the answer to this, but I have a feeling that it dates back as long ago as Roman times. And if anyone's a historian and can tell me, do let me know. And the fixation with the numbers, I suspect, is something to do with them liking certain numbers and not liking other numbers. There were certain numbers regarded as a bit unlucky, so I suspect they probably numbered them for that reason. But I'm going to take this as homework, and I'm going to come back next week and find out why we decided February had 28 days, not by standard. As I say, I suspect this is a 2,000-year-old legacy. Where the 29 days comes from, of course, is that because the sun going round, the Earth going round the sun takes a year, that defines our year. Therefore, that period of time has to fit into a set number of days to match up with a one-year calendar, but it doesn't. It takes a slightly different amount of time for the Earth to go all the way around the sun than a perfect number of days. So if we were to ignore the fact that it doesn't quite work, then eventually, given enough time, eventually you'd be having all your seasons moving around, and summer would come at the wrong time of year in the calendar. So to make that work, we add an extra day, February the 29th, every 4 years, which puts us back on to the right cycle again to make up for the fact that the Earth isn't taking quite the right number of days to go, a complete number of days to go all the way around the sun. But I'll come back with the number of days in February and why it lost out a bit as homework for next time. It's a good question, but it's more history than science. But I'll come back with as close an answer as I can come up with.
Probably a unilateral decision, uninformed by anything. But let's go to Magmini's question. If I decide not to breastfeed, what happens to the produced milk? Is it absorbed back into the body? Where does it go? And can I benefit from the nutrients of that milk?
A lovely question. And the answer is that the body reabsorbs anything it doesn't use from glandular tissue. Breast tissue, men have the same tissue as women. It's just more developed in women under the influence of female hormones. This glandular tissue produces milk by taking nutrients from the blood, because the breast tissue has a very rich blood supply, and the cells, at the bottoms of the cells, they see the blood supply and they have transporters which pull in raw materials from the blood. The cells have appropriate genetic programs running in them that turn those raw materials into the components of breast milk, which are then secreted across the other side surface of the cells into the ducts inside the breast, which fills those ducts with milk. And if the baby feeds, then you have what's called a myoepithelial contraction. Small muscles around the linings of the ducts contract and squeeze the milk out. The breast is sensitive to this effect, and this acts as a stimulus to make more milk. And this is why cows, when you train them to be milked, will produce up to a certain high yield of milk and then hold it at that level. But if you stop milking them, eventually the milk yield falls off. And that's nature's way of knowing, well, when the baby is losing interest in breastfeeding, or you're not feeding it as much, it's onto solid food, doesn't get as much nutrient or enough nutrient from breastfeeding, the body doesn't waste the effort producing milk you're not going to use. So where does it go? Well, the answer is that the milk is scavenged back, because there are various cell types there that can grab the nutrients back into the breast gland tissue. And there are also populations of cells there that can break down some of the other components in the milk and liberate the raw materials again, which find their way back via various channels in the body, lymphatics and so on, into your general circulation, and they can be reused elsewhere in the body. And a similar process actually happens with what's going on in men's testicles, because men make about 5,000 sperm a second, and you, with an ejaculation, release millions and millions of the things. But you're continuously making them, you're not continuously releasing them, thank goodness. So what happens to them? Well, they also are being stored to a certain extent, but some are being recycled and scavenged back into the local glandular tissue, and the materials are then used again to make other things in your body.
We've got a wrap. Unfortunately, I can have you for a whole day, Dr. Chris Smith, the Naked Scientist, lecturer at the University of Cambridge. Another such opportunity next Friday after 9:30.
Monday to Friday
from 9 a.m.
This is Views and News with Clarence Ford.
only on Cape Talk.